I'm 73 years old, and for 45 years, I've kept a secret that could change everything we think we know about what lives in the wilderness of North America. My name is Garrett Thornhill, and I own 6,000 acres of cattle ranch in the most remote corner of Montana, pressed up against the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Last month, a teenager doing a school project on satellite imagery noticed something strange on my property through Google Earth. Unusual structures in a box canyon that shouldn't have anything in it but rocks and pine trees. Within 72 hours, those images went viral. Cryptozoologists, conspiracy theorists, and curiosity seekers descended on my ranch like locusts. News helicopters violated my airspace. Reporters camped at my gate. And the secret I'd protected since 1978, the secret my grandfather made me swear to keep, the secret that cost me everything I might have had in terms of a normal life, that secret was unraveling in real time because those structures in the canyon weren't mine. They belonged to them, to the community of 27 Bigfoot who'd lived on my property for longer than I'd been alive. And now, after decades of guardianship, I had to make an impossible choice. Let them scatter into a world that would hunt them down now that it knew they existed, or do the one thing I swore I'd never do, tell the truth. Before we go any further, I need to ask something of you. If this story moves you, if it makes you think differently about what we share this world with, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel, not for me, but because stories like this, true stories that challenge what we think we know, they need to be heard. And I'm just an old rancher who's finally ready to talk. Your support means this reaches people who need to hear it. Now, let me take you back to where this all started. Back to 1978, when I was 28 years old and thought I understood the world. My grandfather, Samuel Thornhill, died on March 14th, 1978. He was 89 years old, tough as the Montana winter and sharp as a tack right up until the end. He'd built the Thornhill Ranch from nothing starting in 1923, 6,000 acres of high country that most people said was too remote, too rough, too unforgiving to make a living from. He proved them wrong. I'd grown up on that ranch, spent every summer there from the time I was 6 years old, learning to ride, to rope, to read the weather in the clouds that built up over the mountains every afternoon. My father, grandfather's only son, had died in Vietnam in 1968, so I was the last Thornhill. The ranch would be mine. 3 days before grandfather died, he called me to his bedside in the ranch house, the same house he'd built with his own hands 55 years earlier. The same house where I'm sitting right now as I tell you this story. "Garrett," he said, his voice thin but steady, "there's something you need to know before I go, something I've never told another living soul except your grandmother, God rest her." I pulled a chair close to his bed. Outside the window, March snow was falling, thick and heavy, the kind that would pile 3 feet deep by morning. "The ranch isn't just ours," he continued. "We share it, have since the beginning. There are others here in the high country, in the box canyon up past Widow's Creek. The old ones, the ones who were here long before white men, long before the Blackfeet even. They've got as much right to this land as we do. More, maybe." I thought the morphine was making him confused. "Grandfather, what are you talking about? What old ones?" His hand gripped mine with surprising strength. "Don't play dumb with me, boy. You know the stories. Every culture's got them. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the wild men of the mountains, they're real, Garrett, real as you and me, and there's a community of them living in the North Canyon, have been for longer than I've been alive. I stared at him, searching his face for signs of delirium, but his eyes were clear, focused, completely serious. "I know how it sounds," he said. "Took me years to believe it myself, but in 1926, 3 years after I started this ranch, I found one of them injured. Big male, caught in a rock slide up near the canyon entrance. I helped him. Took me 2 months of leaving food, of proving I wasn't a threat. He survived, and after that they let me know they were there, let me see them, just glimpses at first. Eventually, I understood. They'd been using that canyon as a gathering place for generations, safe, hidden, protected by the terrain." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, still not sure I believed him. "Because the ranch is yours now, and with it comes a responsibility. You protect them, Garrett. You keep people away from that canyon. You never tell anyone what's up there. You never let the world know they exist. Because if you do, they'll be hunted down, captured, killed, or worse, studied like animals in a lab. They're not animals. They're people, just different from us. They deserve to live in peace." He made me swear it. Right there, with his hand in mine and snow falling outside, I swore I'd protect them, even though part of me still thought he was hallucinating. He died 2 days later, and I inherited 6,000 acres of Montana wilderness, 300 head of cattle, and a secret I didn't quite believe. That belief changed on June 2nd, 1978. I'd spent the spring settling into ranch life, learning the business side of things, working with the 3 ranch hands grandfather had employed for years. Good men, all of them, but none of them knew about the canyon. Grandfather had always handled that section of the property himself, and I understood why now. The North Canyon was a geological oddity, a box canyon carved by ancient glaciers, with walls that rose nearly vertical, for 200 feet on 3 sides. The only entrance was a narrow gap, maybe 30 feet wide, choked with deadfall and thick brush. Easy to miss if you didn't know it was there. The canyon itself opened up into a space about 40 acres in size, with a year-round creek running through it, thick stands of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, and enough shelter to protect against the worst of winter. I'd been avoiding it, to be honest. Part of me didn't want to know if Grandfather had been telling the truth. But by early June, curiosity got the better of me. I rode up there on a Thursday morning, telling my ranch hands I was checking fence line in the high country. It took 3 hours to reach the canyon entrance, following game trails and old paths that Grandfather had shown me years ago. The last mile, I went on foot, leading my horse through terrain too rough to ride. The entrance to the canyon was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits with Grandfather, a jumble of fallen trees and thick brush that looked completely impassable. But there was a way through if you knew where to look, a narrow path that wound between the deadfall, barely wide enough for a man to walk. I tied my horse to a tree and made my way through on foot. My heart was pounding, though I couldn't have said if it was from exertion or nervousness. What was I expecting to find? Nothing, probably. An empty canyon that would prove Grandfather's story had been the morphine talking. I emerged from the narrow passage into the canyon proper and stopped dead. There were structures there, not natural formations, not random piles of deadfall. Deliberate structures. 3 of them that I could see immediately, built against the canyon walls where the rock overhung to create natural shelter. They were made from branches, carefully woven together and covered with what looked like hides and bark. Lean-tos, I guess you'd call them, but more sophisticated than that. They had structure, design, purpose. My mouth went dry. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be from hikers or hunters. We were miles from any trail, and the canyon entrance was too hidden, too difficult to find, and these structures looked old, weathered, like they'd been there for years. I heard water then, the creek that ran through the canyon, and something else, a sound that made every hair on my body stand up, a low, rumbling vocalization coming from somewhere deeper in the canyon. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice, something in between. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, get back through that narrow entrance, get on my horse and ride back to the ranch house. But Grandfather's words echoed in my head. They're people, just different from us. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm Garrett Thornhill, Samuel Thornhill's grandson. This is my land now. I'm not here to hurt anyone." Silence, just the sound of wind in the pines and water, over rocks, then movement. From behind one of the structures, a figure emerged, and my brain simply refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. It was massive, 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in reddish-brown hair that was lighter on the chest and darker on the limbs, broad shoulders that would make a grizzly bear look small, arms that hung down past where knees would be on a human, ending in hands that were clearly visible, clearly functional, clearly not paws. But it was the face that locked me in place, not quite human, not quite ape. A heavy brow ridge, a broad, flat nose, a mouth that was more expressive than any animal I'd ever seen, and eyes, dark brown eyes that looked directly at me with unmistakable intelligence. We stared at each other across maybe 50 feet of canyon floor. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then another figure appeared, smaller, maybe 6.5 feet tall, with darker fur. It stayed partially behind the larger one, watching me with obvious wariness. A juvenile, I realized. Not a child, but not fully grown either. The larger one, the adult, made a sound, not aggressive, more like a question. It was asking something, though I had no idea what. "My grandfather?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Samuel. He told me about you. Before he died, he made me promise to protect you." The adult tilted its head slightly, a gesture that was so human it sent chills down my spine. It understood. Maybe not my words, but my tone, my body language, something. Very slowly, I lowered myself to a sitting position on the ground. I wanted to appear non-threatening, to show I wasn't going to chase them or attack. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. The adult watched this, then did something that changed everything. It sat down, too. Right there on the canyon floor, it lowered its massive body into a sitting position, mirroring my posture. We sat like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. The juvenile eventually sat as well, though it stayed close to the adult, clearly seeking protection. Finally, I spoke again. "I don't know if you can understand me, but I'm going to keep my grandfather's promise. I'll protect this place. I'll keep people away. You're safe here." The adult made another sound, softer this time. Then it stood, and the juvenile stood with it. They turned and walked deeper into the canyon, disappearing into the trees. I sat there for another 20 minutes after they'd gone, trying to process what had just happened. Everything I thought I knew about the world had just been turned upside down. Bigfoot was real, not just real, but living on my property, and my grandfather had known for 50 years. When I finally made my way back through the canyon entrance, back to my horse, back down the mountain to the ranch house, I felt like I was moving through a dream. Nothing seemed quite real. That night, I pulled out Grandfather's journals. He'd kept detailed records of the ranch for 55 years, and I'd inherited boxes of them. I'd glanced through them before, but now I was looking for something specific. I found it in a journal from 1926, an entry dated September 12th. Found one of the old ones today, injured in a rock slide near the North Canyon. Male, probably middle-aged, based on the silver in his fur. Leg badly broken. He was terrified when he saw me. Tried to drag himself away despite the pain. I left food and water, backed off. Don't know if he'll survive the night, but I can't just leave him to die. Martha thinks I'm crazy. Maybe I am. The entries continued through that fall and into winter. Grandfather documenting his attempts to help the injured Bigfoot, leaving food, medicine, eventually gaining enough trust that he could approach. By December, the creature had healed enough to return to the canyon, and in the spring of 1927, Grandfather wrote about seeing others. There are more of them, at least a dozen, maybe more. They gather in the North Canyon during summer months. Families, I think. I've seen juveniles, adults, even what might be elders. They have a society, a structure. This isn't just animals living in the wild. This is a community. I read through years of entries, watching my grandfather document his observations. He never got close again, not like he had with the injured male, but he watched from a distance, left food occasionally, and most importantly, kept everyone else away from that canyon. In a 1943 entry, he wrote something that made my blood run cold. Heard stories in town today about a hunting party that claims they shot a Bigfoot up near Glacier. They're calling it a hoax, saying no body was found, but I know better. I know they're out there, and I know what would happen if people really believed. They'd be hunted to extinction within a generation. The North Canyon must remain secret, whatever it costs. Whatever it costs. Those words would define the next 45 years of my life. Over that first summer of 1978, I visited the canyon a dozen times, always alone, always careful to make sure no one followed me. I never went deep into the canyon, never tried to approach the structures. I'd sit at the entrance, in a spot where I could be easily seen, and I'd wait. Sometimes I'd see them, usually just glimpses, figures moving between the trees watching me from a distance. Other times I'd hear them, those low vocalizations that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. I started leaving food. Not every visit. I didn't want them to become dependent, but occasionally I'd bring apples, carrots, sometimes dried meat or fish. I'd leave it on a flat rock near the entrance and back away. The food was always gone by my next visit, and sometimes there would be something left in return. Interesting stones, bundles of medicinal plants, once a perfectly preserved bird skull. They were communicating with me, acknowledging my presence, my offerings, building trust, just as Grandfather had done 50 years earlier. In August, I had my first real interaction since that initial encounter. I'd brought a bag of apples and was arranging them on the usual rock when I heard movement behind me. I turned slowly, and there was the adult I'd seen before, the one with reddish-brown fur. It was closer than it had ever been, maybe 20 feet away. Close enough that I could see details I'd missed before. The texture of its fur, the way its chest rose and fell with each breath, the incredible expressiveness of its face. We looked at each other, and I saw something in its eyes that I hadn't noticed during that first encounter. Sadness. Deep, ancient sadness, like it carried the weight of generations. "I'm sorry," I said, not even sure what I was apologizing for. "I'm sorry for whatever my kind has done to yours." It made a sound, low and resonant. Then it did something that took my breath away. It reached down and picked up one of the apples I'd brought. But instead of eating it or taking it away, it held it out toward me. An offering, a gift in return for mine. I stepped forward slowly, my hand outstretched. The creature placed the apple in my palm, its massive fingers brushing against my hand for just a moment. The touch was gentle, careful, aware of its own strength. "Thank you," I whispered. It made another sound, then turned and walked back into the trees. But before it disappeared, it looked back at me once, and in that look, I understood something profound. This wasn't just about protecting them from the world. It was about proving that not all humans were threats, that some of us could be trusted, that coexistence was possible, even if it had to remain secret. I started thinking of that individual as Slate, because of the gray streaks that were beginning to show in its reddish fur. I never said the name aloud, never tried to call it. But in my mind, in my journal entries, that's who it became. Slate, the bridge between our worlds. By the time autumn arrived and the aspen trees turned gold against the dark green pines, I'd accepted my new reality. I was the guardian of a secret that could never be told, the protector of a community that the world believed didn't exist. I had no idea how complicated that protection would become, how many close calls I'd navigate over the decades, how much I'd sacrifice to keep my promise. But on those cool September evenings, sitting at the canyon entrance while the sun set behind the mountains and the first stars appeared, watching shadows move between the trees and hearing those low, resonant calls echo off the canyon walls, I felt something I hadn't felt since my father died. Purpose. The autumn of 1978 brought the first real test of my promise to grandfather. Hunting season opened in October, and suddenly my remote corner of Montana wasn't quite so remote anymore. Hunters from across the state, and even from neighboring states, would venture into the high country looking for elk and mule deer. The North Canyon was technically off limits, part of my private property, but that had never stopped determined hunters before. Grandfather had dealt with trespassers for decades, and now it was my turn. I spent the first week of hunting season riding the boundaries of my property, making my presence known. I put up new signs, bright orange markers that read, "Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." I made sure to be visible, to be the kind of property owner that hunters would think twice about crossing. But on October 15th, I found boot prints leading toward the canyon entrance. My heart nearly stopped when I saw them. 2 sets of tracks, both relatively fresh, probably from that morning. They led up the game trail that approached the canyon, the same trail I used. I followed them quickly, my rifle slung over my shoulder, not because I planned to use it, but because a rancher in Montana without a rifle during hunting season would look suspicious. The tracks led right to the narrow entrance, but thankfully they stopped there. The hunters had found the entrance but hadn't gone through. The deadfall and thick brush had done their job, making the passage look impassable. I could see where they'd poked around a bit, probably trying to determine if there was a way through, but eventually they turned back. I followed their tracks back down the mountain until I found them. 2 men in their 30s, dressed in camouflage, carrying expensive rifles. They were setting up camp about a mile from the canyon entrance, right on the border of my property. "Afternoon," I called out as I approached, making sure they heard me coming. The last thing I wanted was to startle armed hunters. They turned, and I could see the calculation in their eyes. Was I going to be a problem? "Afternoon," the taller one replied. "We're on public land here. Check the maps." "You are," I agreed, dismounting from my horse. "But you were on my land this morning. I found your tracks leading up toward the North Canyon." "We didn't cross any fence lines," the shorter one said defensively. "No fence up there," I said. "Too rough for fencing, but it's still my property, and it's posted. I need you to stay clear of that area." "What's up there that you're so worried about?" the tall one asked. There was suspicion in his voice. I'd prepared for this question. "Unstable ground. Old mining operations from the 1800s. Shafts that aren't properly marked. Tailings. Piles that could collapse. My grandfather lost a horse up there in the 50s, and I nearly lost one myself last spring. It's dangerous, and I don't need the liability of someone getting hurt on my property." It was a good lie. Montana was full of abandoned mines, and everyone knew they were hazardous. The hunters exchanged glances. "We didn't see any mine shafts," the shorter one said. "They're hidden by deadfall and brush. That's what makes them dangerous." "Look, I'm not trying to ruin your hunt. There's plenty of elk on the public land around here. I'm just asking you to stay clear of that one section for your own safety." The tall one studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. We'll stay clear." I thanked them and rode back toward the ranch, but I didn't go far. I circled around and found a vantage point where I could watch their camp without being seen. I stayed there until dark, making sure they didn't try to head back toward the canyon. They didn't. They broke camp the next morning and moved to a different area, but the encounter left me shaken. How many other hunters would find those tracks leading toward the canyon? How long before someone pushed through the entrance and discovered what was inside? That night, I rode back up to the canyon. It was risky, traveling in the dark, but I needed to warn them, needed to let them know that the next few weeks would be dangerous, that they needed to be extra careful, extra hidden. I sat at the entrance in the moonlight and called out softly, "Slate, are you there? I need to talk to you." For a long time, nothing. Then I heard movement, and a massive shadow detached itself from the darker shadows of the canyon. Slate emerged into the moonlight, and I could see the wariness in its posture. "Hunters," I said, gesturing down the mountain. "Men with guns. They found the trail leading up here. They didn't come in, but others might. You need to be careful. Stay deep in the canyon. Don't make any sounds that might carry, not for the next few weeks." Slate tilted its head, and I could see it processing what I was saying. It understood the word guns. I was sure of that. Grandfather's journals had mentioned using gestures and simple words to communicate danger. I mimed holding a rifle, then made a shooting motion. Slate's reaction was immediate and visceral. It recoiled, making a low, distressed sound. Its hands came up in a defensive gesture, and I saw something in its eyes that broke my heart. Terror. Deep, primal terror. "I won't let them hurt you," I said quickly. "I promise. But you have to stay hidden. Please." Slate stared at me for a long moment, then made a series of soft vocalizations. It was communicating something, but I didn't understand what. Then it turned and disappeared back into the canyon, moving with urgent purpose. I rode home that night with a sick feeling in my stomach. That reaction to the gun gesture, that terror, it wasn't just instinctive fear. It was learned, remembered. Slate had seen guns before, had seen what they could do. The rest of hunting season was a nightmare of vigilance. I patrolled constantly, checking for tracks, watching for trespassers. I found evidence of hunters approaching the canyon 3 more times, and each time I managed to intercept them, redirect them, convince them there was nothing up there worth investigating. I told one group the area was contaminated with arsenic from old mining operations. I told another that I'd seen a grizzly with cubs up there and didn't want anyone getting mauled on my property. I told a third that the terrain was too unstable and I'd already called the county about getting it properly marked as hazardous. Whatever lie worked, I used it. By the time hunting season ended in late November, I was exhausted. But I'd succeeded. No one had entered the canyon. The secret was safe. For now. Winter brought a different kind of challenge. The snow in the high country could get deep, sometimes 10 or 15 feet, in the protected areas. I worried about the community in the canyon. Did they have enough food? Enough shelter? Should I try to bring supplies? I made it up there twice in December on snowshoes, breaking trail through chest-deep powder. Both times I left food, dried meat, and preserved vegetables from my root cellar. Both times the food was gone by my next visit. But I didn't see them. The canyon was silent, the structures barely visible under heavy snow. They were hunkered down, surviving the brutal Montana winter the way their kind had survived for thousands of years. In January, during a brief warming spell, I made it up there again. This time, I found something waiting for me at the entrance, a bundle wrapped in what looked like woven bark. Inside were pine nuts, perfectly shelled, and a piece of worked stone, smooth and flat, with a simple design scratched into its surface. 2 figures, one large and one small, standing side by side. A gift, a thank you, a reminder that they were still there, still surviving. I kept that stone. I still have it, 45 years later, sitting on my desk as I tell you this story, a reminder of what I was protecting and why. Spring of 1979 brought new life to the canyon. When the snow finally melted enough for me to make the journey in April, I found evidence of activity everywhere. The structures had been repaired, reinforced. New lean-tos had been built, and there were more tracks in the mud near the creek. Small tracks, child-sized, that had babies over the winter. The community was growing. I sat at the entrance that day, overwhelmed by the responsibility I'd taken on. This wasn't just about protecting a few individuals anymore. This was about protecting a future. Children who would grow up in that canyon, who would have children of their own, who would continue a lineage that stretched back into prehistory. Slade appeared that afternoon, and I barely recognized it. The reddish fur had more gray in it now, and it moved with a slight stiffness that suggested the hard winter had taken its toll. But its eyes were bright, alert, and when it saw me, it made a sound that I'd learned to recognize as greeting. "You made it through," I said, relief flooding through me. I was worried. Slate moved closer than it ever had before, stopping just 10 feet away. Then It did something that made my throat tight. It gestured toward the canyon, then made a cradling motion with its arms. It was showing me, telling me about the babies. "I saw the tracks," I said. "Congratulations. How many?" Slate held up 3 fingers. 3 babies. 3 new lives that depended on this canyon remaining secret. "I'll protect them," I promised. "All of you, whatever it takes." Slate studied me for a long moment, then reached into the thick fur on its side and pulled out something small. It approached, closing the distance between us to just a few feet, and held out its hand. In its palm was a tooth, large, probably from an elk, carved with intricate designs, spirals and lines that formed patterns I didn't understand but recognized as deliberate, meaningful. "For me?" I asked. Slate made an affirmative sound and pressed the tooth into my hand. Its fingers were warm, rough, gentle. Then it touched its own chest, touched my chest, and made a sound I'd never heard before, low, resonant, almost musical. I didn't know what it meant, not exactly. But I felt the weight of it, the significance. This wasn't just a gift, it was a bond, an acknowledgement that we were connected now, that my protection of them and their trust in me had created something that transcended species. "Thank you," I whispered. "I'll keep it always." Slate nodded, another gesture it had learned from watching me, and turned back toward the canyon. But it paused at the entrance and looked back, and I could have sworn I saw something like hope in its eyes. That carved tooth sits on my desk next to the stone. 2 artifacts from a people the world doesn't believe exists. Proof that I've kept locked away for 45 years. Until now. As spring turned to summer and summer to fall, I settled into the rhythm of guardianship. Regular visits to the canyon, always careful to make sure I wasn't followed. Food offerings, though less frequent now that I understood they were perfectly capable of providing for themselves. Vigilance against intruders, especially during hunting season. But I was also learning to read the signs they left for me. A certain arrangement of stones meant they'd seen strangers nearby. A bundle of specific plants meant they needed something, usually salt, which I'd leave for them. A carved stick meant all was well, a simple check-in. We were developing a language, Slate and I. Not words, but communication nonetheless. And through that communication, I began to understand more about them. They weren't just surviving in that canyon, they were living. They had culture, traditions, knowledge passed down through generations. The carvings they made weren't just decorative. They were stories, histories, records of their people. One day in August of 1979, Slate showed me something that changed my understanding completely. It led me deeper into the canyon than I had ever been allowed before, to a section where the rock wall was smooth and protected from weather. On that wall were paintings, faded, ancient, but unmistakable. Figures that looked like Slate and its people, but also figures that looked human. And between them, scenes of interaction, hunting together, sharing food, living side by side. "We used to live together," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Humans and your people, before." Slate made an affirmative sound, then touched one of the paintings. A scene that showed the 2 groups separated, with human figures holding what looked like weapons. "We drove you away," I said, the weight of that history settling on my shoulders. "We hunted you, killed you, until you had to hide." Slate touched another painting, this one showing just a few of its people hiding in mountains and forests. A diaspora, a people scattered and diminished. "How many are left?" I asked. In the world, I mean, not just here. Slate held up both hands, fingers spread, then closed them, opened them again, showing fewer fingers. It repeated this gesture, the same one grandfather had described in his journals. Populations declining, generation after generation. My heart sank. There weren't many left, maybe a few hundred, scattered across the vast wilderness of North America, maybe fewer. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I'm so sorry for what we've done. Slate placed one massive hand on my shoulder, a gesture of forgiveness that I didn't deserve. Then it led me back toward the canyon entrance, back to the boundary between our worlds. That night, I started a new journal, not just observations and dates, but everything I was learning, their culture, their history, their way of life. If something happened to me, if I died before I could pass this knowledge on, I wanted there to be a record, proof that they existed, that they mattered, that they deserved to be remembered. I had no idea that journal, and the dozens that would follow over the next 4 decades, would one day become the evidence that would change everything. The 1980s brought changes to Montana that I couldn't have anticipated. The state was growing, developing, becoming less isolated. Roads improved, tourism increased, and with every passing year, the wilderness that protected Slate's community shrank just a little bit more. By 1982, I'd been protecting the canyon for 4 years. 4 years of constant vigilance, of lies and misdirection, of sacrifices I was only beginning to understand. I was 32 years old, and while most men my age were getting married, starting families, building normal lives, I was spending my evenings hiking into remote canyons to leave food for beings that weren't supposed to exist. My sister Carolyn visited that summer. She lived in Billings, worked as a real estate agent, and had been pestering me for months about the ranch's potential. She arrived in July, driving a new Buick and wearing clothes that looked completely out of place against the rough timber of the ranch house. "Garrett, this place is sitting on a gold mine," she said over dinner that first night. "Do you have any idea what developers would pay for this land? You've got 6,000 acres of pristine Montana wilderness, access to national forest, views that go on forever. You could sell off half of it and live comfortably for the rest of your life." I kept my voice calm, even though my stomach was churning. "The ranch isn't for sale, Carolyn. Grandfather left it to me to run, not to parcel off to developers." "Grandfather's been dead for 4 years," she said not unkindly, "and you're killing yourself trying to run this place alone. When's the last time you even took a vacation? When's the last time you went on a date?" "I'm fine," I said. "The ranch is doing well. The cattle operation is profitable. I don't need to sell anything." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I'm not talking about need, Garrett. I'm talking about opportunity. There's a development company out of Bozeman that's looking for properties exactly like this. They want to build luxury cabins, create a high-end wilderness resort. They'd pay top dollar, and you'd still own half the property. You could keep the ranch house, keep running cattle on the lower pastures. You'd just be sharing the high country. The high country, where the canyon was, where Slate's community lived." "No," I said firmly, "absolutely not. The high country stays wild. That's not negotiable." Caroline sat back, frustration clear on her face. "Why? What's up there that's so important? It's just rocks and trees, Garrett. You never even use that section of the property." "It's important to me," I said. "That's all you need to know. The answer is no, Caroline. now and forever. The ranch isn't being developed, and that's final. She left 2 days later, angry and confused. We didn't speak for 6 months after that. When we finally reconciled, she never brought up development again, but I could see the question in her eyes every time she visited. What was I protecting? What was worth sacrificing a fortune for? I couldn't tell her, couldn't tell anyone. That autumn, I had my first serious close call. A Forest Service survey team showed up in September, explaining they were updating maps of the area, documenting changes in terrain and vegetation. They had permission to access public lands, which bordered my property on 3 sides. We'll need to verify the property boundaries. The team leader, a woman named Patricia Holbrook, explained. She was in her 40s, professional, thorough. We have the old survey maps from 1953, but we need to confirm they're still accurate. We'll be working in this area for about 2 weeks. My blood ran cold. The property boundaries near the canyon were poorly marked, deliberately so. Grandfather had never wanted clear lines that would draw attention to that area. If the survey team started poking around up there, they might find the canyon entrance, might see signs of habitation. I'll need to accompany you, I said quickly. Insurance purposes. If you're on my property, I need to be there. Patricia frowned. Mr. Thornhill, we're professionals. We don't need supervision. It's not about supervision, I lied. It's about liability. My insurance requires that I be present when anyone accesses the remote sections of the property. Too many hazards, old mine shafts, unstable ground. I'm sure you understand. She didn't look happy, but she agreed. For the next 2 weeks, I shadowed that survey team like a ghost. Every morning, I'd meet them at the access point. Every day, I'd guide them along routes that kept them away from the canyon. When they wanted to check an area that got too close, I'd point out hazards, real or invented, that made them reconsider. There's an old mine shaft over that ridge, I'd say, not properly marked, too dangerous to approach without proper equipment. Or, that section's got unstable ground. Lost a horse there a few years back. The county's supposed to mark it as hazardous, but they haven't gotten around to it yet. I became an expert at misdirection, at creating obstacles that seemed legitimate. And when misdirection didn't work, I'd simply alter their maps. Not obviously, just small changes. A property line shifted a few hundred yards. A terrain feature marked in a slightly different location. Enough to keep them away from the canyon without raising suspicion. It worked. The survey team completed their work and left, their updated maps showing nothing unusual in the high country of the Thornhill Ranch. But the experience left me shaken. How long could I keep this up? How many more close calls before someone got through my defenses? That winter, I made a decision. I needed to make the canyon even more inaccessible, more hidden. Over the next 2 years, I worked on creating additional barriers. I hauled deadfall to the entrance, making the passage even more difficult to spot. I planted fast-growing brush that would fill in gaps. I even started a rumor in town about a grizzly den in that area, knowing that would keep most people away. But I also started documenting everything more carefully. I bought a camera, a Nikon FM2, that I kept locked in a safe in my bedroom. During my visits to the canyon, when Slate would allow it, I'd take photographs. Never of them directly, not at first. That felt like a violation of trust. But of their structures, their artwork, the evidence of their existence. I told myself it was insurance. If something happened to me, if I died unexpectedly, someone would need to know the truth. Someone would need to continue protecting them. The photographs and journals would be proof, would be a way to pass on the responsibility. But deep down, I knew there was another reason. I was documenting a people who were disappearing, and some part of me needed to preserve evidence that they'd existed, even if that evidence never saw the light of day. By 1984, my relationship with Slate had deepened into something I can only describe as friendship. We'd developed our own form of communication, a mixture of gestures, simple words, and intuitive understanding that transcended language. Slate would show me things, teach me things, how to read weather patterns in ways I'd never learned, how to move through the forest without disturbing it, how to find water sources that didn't appear on any map, knowledge that its people had accumulated over thousands of years, passed down through generations. In return, I'd tell Slate about the human world, about towns and cities, about technology and progress. I'd bring newspapers sometimes, and Slate would study the photographs with intense curiosity. Pictures of cars, airplanes, buildings, things that must have seemed like magic to a being who lived without any of it. One day in June of that year, Slate showed me something that broke my heart. We were sitting at our usual spot near the canyon entrance, and Slate pulled out a small bundle wrapped in hide. Inside were photographs, old ones, yellowed and cracked with age. They were pictures of Bigfoot, dead Bigfoot, laid out like hunting trophies with grinning men standing over them. The photographs looked like they were from the 1920s or 30s, based on the clothing and the quality of the images. "Where did you get these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Slate made a series of gestures. "Found them in an old cabin, hidden." I looked at the photographs more carefully. There were 5 of them, each showing a different scene. In one, a large male lay on the ground, clearly dead, with 3 hunters posing beside it. In another, a smaller individual, possibly female, was strung up by its feet like a deer. The others were similar, trophies, proof of kills. "I'm so sorry," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "I'm so sorry." Slate touched one of the photographs, its finger resting on the image of the dead male. Then it touched its own chest and made a sound of profound grief. "Your father?" I asked. Slate shook its head, made a different gesture, older, more distant. "Grandfather? Great-grandfather?" An affirmative sound. Slate was showing me its family history, a history of being hunted, killed, displayed as monsters. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Slate gathered up the photographs carefully and put them back in the hide bundle. Then it looked at me with those deep, intelligent eyes and made a series of gestures I'd come to understand. "Remember, don't forget, tell the truth." "I can't tell the truth," I said, anguish in my voice. "If I do, more hunters will come, more of your people will die. The only way to protect you is to keep you secret." Slate made a sound that might have been agreement or resignation. Then it did something it had never done before. It reached out and took my hand, holding it gently in its massive palm. We sat like that for a long time, 2 beings from different worlds, connected by a secret that could never be told. That moment changed something between us. We weren't just guardian and protected anymore. We were friends, bound by trust and shared burden. The rest of the 1980s passed in a blur of vigilance and routine. Hunting seasons came and went, each one bringing new challenges. I turned away trespassers, invented new hazards, maintained the barriers around the canyon. The lies came easier now, polished by repetition. In 1987, I hired a new ranch hand, a young man named Tom Bridger who'd grown up in Great Falls. He was a good worker, reliable and respectful, but he was also curious. Too curious. "Boss, what's up in that north section?" he asked one day in August. "I've been here 6 months and you've never sent me up there. Is there something wrong with the grazing?" "Old mining operations," I said, the lie automatic now. "Unstable ground, too dangerous for cattle, too dangerous for people. I check it myself occasionally, but that's it." "Seems like a waste of good land," Tom said. "Maybe we could get it surveyed properly, see if it could be reclaimed." "No," I said more sharply than I intended. "That section stays as is. That's not negotiable, Tom. If you can't accept that, we're going to have a problem." He backed off, but I could see the suspicion in his eyes. What was I hiding? Why was I so protective of a section of property that seemed to have no value? I had to let him go 3 months later, not because he was a bad worker, but because he'd started asking too many questions, started suggesting we explore the high country, started making noises about wanting to hunt up there during the season. I couldn't risk it. After Tom left, I was more careful about who I hired. I looked for people who were content to do their jobs without asking questions, who respected boundaries, who didn't have the curiosity that might lead them to investigate the forbidden section of the ranch. It meant I went through a lot of ranch hands over the years. It meant I developed a reputation as a difficult employer, someone who was secretive and controlling. But it kept the canyon safe. By 1990, I was 40 years old. 12 years of guardianship had taken their toll. I had no wife, no children, no close friends. My relationship with Caroline was strained. My social life consisted of occasional trips to town for supplies and the bare minimum of interactions required to run a business. But I had Slate. I had the community in the canyon. And I had the knowledge that I was protecting something precious, something that deserved to exist. That year brought a new challenge, one I hadn't anticipated. A wildfire started in the national forest to the east, sparked by lightning during a dry August. Within days, it had consumed thousands of acres and was moving west toward my property. The fire crews arrived, setting up command posts, bringing in equipment and personnel. They needed access to my land to create fire breaks, to position resources. I couldn't refuse without raising suspicions, but I also couldn't let them get near the canyon. For 3 days, I barely slept. I worked alongside the fire crews, but I also guided them, directed them, made sure their fire breaks and staging areas were positioned away from the north section. When they wanted to use the high country as a vantage point, I pointed out better locations. When they suggested creating a fire break near the canyon entrance, I convinced them the terrain was too rough, that their equipment would get stuck. The fire came within 2 miles of the canyon before the wind shifted and pushed it back east. By the time it was contained, over 15,000 acres had burned, but the canyon was safe. I hiked up there as soon as the fire crews left. The air still smelled of smoke, and ash covered everything like gray snow. I found Slate waiting at the entrance, and I could see the fear in its eyes. The community had been preparing to flee, to abandon their home if the fire got too close. "It's over," I told Slate. "You're safe. The fire's out." Slate made a sound of relief, then gestured toward the canyon. I followed, and for the first time, I saw the full extent of their community. The fire had forced them to gather together, and there were more of them than I'd realized. I counted 23 individuals, ranging from infants to elders. 23 lives that depended on this canyon, on my protection, on the secret remaining intact. The weight of that responsibility nearly crushed me. But I also felt something else, pride. 12 years of sacrifice, of lies, of isolation, and they were still here, still surviving, still raising their children in relative safety. I won't let anything happen to you, I promised Slate. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe. Slate touched my shoulder, that gesture of trust and gratitude I'd come to cherish. Then it led me deeper into the canyon, to a place I'd never been allowed before. There, carved into the rock face, was a new painting. It showed a human figure standing between the community and danger, protecting them. The figure was clearly meant to be me. "I don't deserve this," I said, my voice breaking. Slate made a sound that might have been disagreement. Then it touched the painting, touched me, and made a gesture I'd seen before. Family. I wasn't just their guardian anymore. I was part of their community, part of their story. The 1990s brought the most significant change yet: technology. In 1991, I bought my first computer, an IBM PS1 that I used primarily for ranch bookkeeping. But it also gave me access to something new: the Internet. By the mid-90s, I was online regularly, and what I found terrified me. Bigfoot enthusiast groups, hunters comparing notes, researchers sharing sighting locations. The Internet was making it easier than ever for people to coordinate, to share information, to organize expeditions into remote wilderness areas. I saw posts about Montana sightings, about the Bob Marshall Wilderness, about areas uncomfortably close to my property. I saw photographs, most of them obvious fakes, but some that made my blood run cold because they looked real. I saw discussions about the best weapons for taking down a large primate, about the money that could be made from proving Bigfoot's existence. The world was getting smaller, the wilderness was shrinking, and the technology that was supposed to connect humanity was also making it easier to hunt down the last remnants of a people who just wanted to be left alone. I started monitoring these sites obsessively, looking for any mention of my area, any indication that someone was getting too close. I created fake accounts, spread misinformation, posted about sightings in completely different states to draw attention away from Montana. It was exhausting, adding another layer to the constant vigilance I already maintained. But it was necessary. In 1994, Slate showed me something that explained so much. We were sitting at our usual spot, and Slate pulled out a bundle I'd never seen before. Inside were artifacts, old ones, stone tools, carved bones, woven fibers that had somehow survived decades or centuries. But there was also something else: a journal, leather-bound, water-damaged, but still readable. It was written in English, dated 1873. I opened it carefully, and my hand started shaking as I read the first entry. June 12th, 1873. We have been tracking the creatures for 3 weeks now. Captain Morrison believes there are at least 24 in this region. The Blackfeet call them the Old Ones and refuse to hunt them, claiming they are sacred. But we have no such superstitions. The pelts alone will fetch a fortune, and if we can capture one alive, the scientific community will pay even more. I flipped through the pages, my horror growing with each entry. It was a hunter's journal, documenting a systematic campaign to track down and kill Bigfoot in Montana during the 1870s. The entries described ambushes, killings, the taking of pelts and bones as trophies. The final entry was dated September 3rd, 1873. We have killed 17 of the creatures. The survivors have fled into the high country, into terrain too rough for us to follow. Captain Morrison believes we have eliminated the primary population in this region. We return to Fort Benton tomorrow with our trophies. The creatures are not as intelligent as the Blackfeet claimed. They died like animals. I closed the journal feeling sick. Where did you get this? Slate made a series of gestures. Found it in an old camp many years ago. You've kept it all this time. Why? Slate touched the journal, then touched its own chest. Remember, don't forget, it was keeping evidence, proof of what had been done to its people, a record of genocide that no one acknowledged because the victims weren't supposed to exist. How many were there? I asked. Before the hunting, before we drove you into hiding. Slate held up both hands, fingers spread. Then it made a gesture I'd seen before, multiplying. Many hands, many fingers, thousands maybe. And now? Slate held up both hands again, but this time showing only a few fingers. Then it made a gesture of scattering, spreading out. A few hundred at most, scattered across the vast wilderness of North America, a people on the edge of extinction. I'm so sorry, I said, the words feeling inadequate. I'm so sorry for what we did, for what we're still doing. Slate made a soft sound and placed the journal in my hands. Keep it. Remember, tell the truth when it's safe. When will it be safe? I asked. Slate had no answer for that. Neither did I. I kept that journal, locked it away with my photographs and my own journals, evidence of a crime that spanned centuries, proof that would mean nothing to a world that didn't believe the victims existed. By the late 90s, I'd been protecting the canyon for 20 years. 20 years of my life dedicated to keeping a secret, to maintaining a lie, to sacrificing everything that might have made me happy for the sake of beings that most people thought were myths. I was 48 years old. My hair was going gray. My knees ached from decades of hiking rough terrain. I'd had 2 minor heart scares that I'd ignored because I couldn't risk being hospitalized, couldn't risk someone else checking on the ranch while I was gone. But the community in the canyon was thriving. The population had grown to 29 individuals. I'd watched children grow into adults, watched new babies being born, watched the cycle of life continue in that hidden place. Slate was aging too. The gray in its fur had spread, and it moved with the stiffness of advancing years. But its mind was sharp, and our communication had become so refined that we barely needed gestures anymore. We understood each other on a level that transcended language. One evening in October of 1999, as the new millennium approached and the world worried about Y2K, I sat with Slate at the canyon entrance and asked a question I'd been avoiding for years. What happens when I die? Who's going to protect you then? Slate was quiet for a long time. Then it made a gesture toward the mountains, toward the deep wilderness beyond my property. Leave. Go deeper. Hide better. You shouldn't have to, I said. You shouldn't have to keep running, keep hiding. This is your world too. You have as much right to exist as we do. Slate made a sound that might have been agreement or resignation. Then it did something it had never done before. It pulled out a small carved stone and pressed it into my hand. On the stone was carved a simple image, a human figure and a Bigfoot figure standing side by side. "What does this mean?" I asked. Slate touched the carving, then touched my chest, then its own chest. Then it made a gesture I'd seen it use with its own family members, a gesture of deep connection, of belonging. "Brothers," I said, understanding flooding through me. "You're saying we're brothers?" Slate made an affirmative sound, and I saw something in its eyes that I'd never seen before. Not just trust or gratitude, but love. The kind of love that transcends species, that exists between beings who've shared decades of life together, who've protected each other, who've become family. I broke down then, sitting on that mountainside as the sun set and the first stars appeared. I cried for everything I'd sacrificed, for everything they'd lost, for the impossibility of our situation. And Slate sat with me, one massive hand resting gently on my shoulder, sharing my grief because it understood. It had always understood. As the year 2000 arrived and the world celebrated surviving Y2K, I made a decision. I would document everything, create a complete record of the community, their culture, their history, not to expose them, but to preserve their story, so that if they did disappear, if the last of them died out, there would be proof that they'd existed, that they'd mattered, that they deserved better than what humanity had given them. I spent the next 3 years taking photographs, writing detailed journals, collecting artifacts that Slate gave me permission to keep. I documented their language, their social structure, their art, their knowledge of the natural world. I created a complete anthropological record of a people that the world didn't believe existed. And I locked it all away in a fireproof safe in my basement, along with instructions that it should only be opened after my death, and only by someone who would understand the responsibility it represented. I had no idea that in 20 years that safe would be opened, that the secret I'd protected for 45 years would be exposed, not by my choice, but by technology I couldn't have imagined. By 2003, I was 53 years old and starting to feel the weight of my years. The ranch was still profitable, but it was getting harder to maintain. My body wasn't what it used to be, and the constant vigilance was exhausting. But I couldn't stop, couldn't retire, couldn't sell the ranch or bring in partners who might discover the canyon. I was trapped by my promise, by my responsibility, by my love for beings that depended on me. That summer, I had a serious health scare, a heart attack, not major, but enough to land me in the hospital in Great Falls for 4 days. The doctors told me I needed to reduce stress, take it easy, maybe consider retiring. I couldn't tell them that retirement wasn't an option, that I had 29 lives depending on me, that if I died, there was no one to take over the protection of the canyon. When I got back to the ranch, Slate was waiting at the canyon entrance. It had known something was wrong, had sensed my absence. When it saw me moving slowly, still weak from the hospital stay, it made a sound of distress. "I'm okay," I told it. "Just getting old, like you." Slate approached closer than it usually did and examined me carefully. Then it did something remarkable. It reached into the thick fur on its side and pulled out a bundle of plants, roots, and bark. It pressed them into my hands and made a series of gestures. Medicine for the heart. Chew, drink as tea. "Your people have medicine?" I asked, surprised. Slate made an affirmative sound. Then it showed me other plants, explaining through gestures what each one was for. Pain, infection, fever, breathing problems. Knowledge that had been passed down through countless generations, natural remedies that worked. I used those plants. I don't know if it was placebo effect or genuine medicine, but I felt better, stronger. My next checkup showed improvement that surprised my doctors. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," they said. I smiled and didn't tell them I was being treated by a Bigfoot herbalist. The 2000s brought new challenges. Cell phones became ubiquitous. GPS devices made navigation easy. Google Earth launched in 2005, and suddenly anyone with an internet connection could view satellite images of anywhere on Earth. I checked my property on Google Earth obsessively, terrified of what might be visible. The canyon itself was hidden by tree cover. But what about the structures? What about the paths leading to the entrance? What about signs of habitation that might be visible from above? For years, I saw nothing concerning. The tree cover was thick enough, the canyon remote enough, that nothing unusual showed up in the satellite images. I thought I was safe. I thought the secret would hold. I was wrong. The technology that would eventually expose everything was already in place, taking photographs from space, storing them in databases, making them available to anyone who cared to look. I just didn't know it yet. By 2010, I was 60 years old. 32 years of guardianship, 32 years of lies and sacrifice and isolation. The community in the canyon had grown to 31 individuals, the largest population I'd ever seen there. Slate was old now, moving slowly, its fur almost entirely gray. But it was still sharp, still communicating with me, still teaching me things about its people and their ways. We'd developed something remarkable over those 3 decades, a genuine friendship that transcended every barrier between us. We'd shared joy and grief, fear and hope, laughter and tears. We'd protected each other, learned from each other, become family in the truest sense of the word. One evening in September of that year, Slate showed me something that took my breath away. It led me to a section of the canyon I'd never seen before, where the rock wall was smooth and protected. And there, carved into the stone, was a complete history of its people. Hundreds of images spanning what must have been thousands of years, showing their origins, their spread across the continent, their interactions with early humans, and eventually their persecution and decline. It was a visual record of an entire civilization carved by countless hands over countless generations. At the end of the timeline, Slate had added a new carving, a human figure standing with the Bigfoot community, protecting them, me. "I'm part of your history now," I said, overwhelmed by the honor and the responsibility. Slate made an affirmative sound. Then it touched the carving, touched me, and made a gesture that encompassed everything. The canyon, the community, the decades we'd shared. "Thank you. Remember us. Tell our story when it's safe." "I will," I promised. "I swear it. Your story will be told." I had no idea how soon that promise would be tested, how soon the choice would be taken out of my hands, how soon the secret that had defined my entire adult life would be exposed to the world. The next 13 years passed in a blur. More close calls, more lies, more sacrifices. I turned 70 in 2020, and the pandemic that shut down the world actually helped me. With fewer people traveling, fewer tourists in the wilderness, the canyon was safer than it had been in years. But technology kept advancing. Satellite imagery kept improving. Google Earth kept updating its database with newer, clearer photographs. And in 2023, a teenager doing a school project would notice something unusual in those photographs. something that would change everything. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March of 2023. I was in the barn checking on a cow that was due to calve any day when my cell phone rang. The number was local, but I didn't recognize it. "Mr. Thornhill?" a woman's voice said when I answered. "This is Janet Kowalski. I'm a teacher at Lewis and Clark High School in Great Falls. I'm calling about something one of my students discovered while working on a geography project." My stomach tightened. "What kind of discovery?" "Well, it's a bit unusual. My student Marcus Chen, he's been using Google Earth to study land use patterns in Montana for his senior project. He was examining your property, the Thornhill Ranch, and he noticed some unusual formations in the satellite imagery, structures that don't appear to be natural, but also don't look like typical ranch buildings." The world seemed to tilt. "Structures?" "Yes, in a canyon in the northern section of your property. Marcus thought they might be old homesteads or maybe Native American sites. He's quite excited about it, actually. He's thinking of focusing his entire project on these formations. I was calling to see if you might be willing to talk to him about the history of your property, maybe give him permission to visit the site for his research." I forced my voice to remain calm. "Can you tell me exactly where these structures are located?" "Of course. Let me pull up the coordinates Marcus noted." I heard papers rustling. "It's at approximately 47.83 degrees north, 112.61 degrees west. Does that sound familiar?" The canyon. She was describing the exact location of the canyon. "Ms. Kowalski, those coordinates are in a very dangerous section of my property. Old mining operations, unstable ground. It's not safe for students or anyone else to visit. I'm going to have to decline permission for any kind of site visit." "Oh, that's disappointing. But Marcus doesn't necessarily need to visit in person. He's already got the satellite images, and he's been analyzing them quite thoroughly. He's even posted some of his findings on social media, asking if anyone knows what these structures might be. It's gotten quite a bit of attention, actually. Several people have suggested they might be Bigfoot shelters, which Marcus thinks is hilarious, but he posted them on social media." My voice came out sharper than I intended. "When?" "Oh, just yesterday evening. His post has already gotten over 3,000 shares. People seem quite fascinated by the mystery. There are even some folks in the comments saying they want to organize an expedition to investigate. Of course, Marcus explained it's private property, but you know how the internet is. Once something goes viral—" I barely heard the rest of what she said. My mind was racing, calculating how much time I had before people started showing up, how long before the canyon was overrun with curiosity seekers and Bigfoot hunters. "Miss Kowalski, I need to go. Please tell Marcus that those structures are dangerous to approach and that I do not give permission for anyone to access that area. If people trespass, I will prosecute to the full extent of the law." I hung up before she could respond and immediately pulled up Google Earth on my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type in the coordinates. When the image loaded, my heart stopped. The satellite photo was crystal clear, much clearer than the images I'd checked years ago. And there, in the canyon, visible through gaps in the tree cover, were the structures. At least 5 of them were clearly visible, their distinctive shapes unmistakable. Lean-tos made from branches and hides, arranged in a deliberate pattern around the creek. I zoomed in further, and my horror deepened. In one of the images, taken during what must have been early spring when the tree cover was thinner, I could see figures, large figures, moving between the structures. The resolution wasn't good enough to show details, but the size and shape were obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. I switched to the historical imagery feature, the one that let you view older satellite photos. The structures were visible in images going back to 2015. 8 years of evidence sitting in Google's database, waiting for someone to notice. I'd been so careful about everything else, but I'd never imagined that satellites would betray us. That technology I couldn't control, couldn't influence, would be the thing that finally exposed the secret. I pulled up Facebook on my phone and searched for Marcus Chen's post. It took me less than a minute to find it. The post had been shared over 5,000 times now, and the comment section was exploding. Dude, those are totally Bigfoot structures. I'm organizing a group to check this out. Who's in? Someone needs to call the authorities. If there really is something there, it should be investigated properly. This is the most exciting thing to happen in Montana in years. The post included screenshots of the satellite images with circles drawn around the structures. Marcus had even created a comparison image showing the same location in winter versus summer, demonstrating that the structures were permanent, not seasonal. My phone started ringing, then ringing again. Text messages started pouring in. News outlets, bloggers, cryptozoology enthusiasts, all of them wanting to know about the mysterious structures on the Thornhill Ranch. I turned off my phone and ran to my truck. I had to get to the canyon, had to warn Slate, had to figure out what to do before the world descended on us. The drive to the trailhead took 20 minutes, and every second felt like an eternity. My mind was racing through possibilities, through options, through scenarios. Could I claim the structures were mine? Some kind of art project or historical recreation? Would anyone believe that? Could I get the images removed from Google Earth? No. That would take legal action, time I didn't have, and would only draw more attention. Could I destroy the structures, make them disappear before anyone arrived? No. The satellite images already existed. Destroying evidence would only make things worse. I parked at the trailhead and hiked toward the canyon as fast as my 73-year-old legs would carry me. My chest was tight, my breathing labored, but I pushed through. I had to reach them, had to warn them. When I emerged through the narrow entrance into the canyon, I found Slate waiting. It had heard me coming, recognized my approach, but when it saw my face, saw the panic I couldn't hide, it made a sound of alarm. "We've been discovered," I said, gasping for breath. "Satellite images. Someone saw the structures from space. It's all over the internet. People are coming, Slate. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but they're coming." Slate stood very still, processing this information. Then it made a sound I'd never heard before, a low, keening wail that echoed off the canyon walls. Within seconds, other members of the community emerged from the structures, from the trees, gathering around us. I saw mothers clutching children. I saw elders moving slowly, confused by the sudden alarm. I saw young adults, strong and capable, looking to Slate for guidance. 31 individuals, 3 generations, all of them looking at me with fear in their eyes. "I'm so sorry," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I tried to protect you. I tried so hard, but I couldn't stop this. I couldn't control satellites and the internet and—" Slate made a sharp sound, cutting off my apology. Then it turned to the community and made a series of vocalizations, gestures, communications I couldn't fully understand but recognized as commands. Decisions being made, the community scattered, moving with urgent purpose. They began gathering belongings, dismantling the smallest structures, preparing to leave. 45 years of habitation, of safety, of home, being abandoned in a matter of hours. I watched, helpless as they worked. Mothers packed supplies while fathers stood guard. Elders gathered precious items, carved stones and woven artifacts that represented their history. Young ones, too small to understand what was happening, clung to their parents, sensing the fear and urgency. Slate approached me, and in its eyes I saw something that broke my heart. Not anger, not blame, but resignation. This was always going to happen eventually. We both knew it. The modern world was too connected, too curious, too invasive. There was nowhere left to hide. "Where will you go?" I asked. Slate gestured toward the mountains, toward the Bob Marshall wilderness, toward the deepest, most remote sections of the Montana backcountry, places where even satellites might not see them, where humans rarely ventured. "It's not safe out there," I said. "Not anymore. There are hikers everywhere, GPS tracking, cell phone coverage in places that used to be completely isolated. You'll be seen. You'll be hunted." Slate made a sound that might have been agreement. Then it touched my shoulder, that gesture of connection we'd shared for 45 years, and made a series of gestures. "Not your fault. You protected us, gave us time, gave us life. Thank you." "It's not enough," I said. 45 years isn't enough. You deserve more. You deserve to exist without fear, without having to run and hide." Slate touched my chest, then its own chest. Brothers, always brothers. Then it turned and began helping the community prepare for departure. I stood there, useless, watching everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed for, crumbling around me. My phone, which I'd turned back on to check for updates, started buzzing incessantly. I looked at the screen and felt my stomach drop. The story had been picked up by a major news outlet. Mysterious structures discovered on Montana ranch, evidence of Bigfoot settlement. The article included the satellite images, Marcus Chen's analysis, and speculation from various experts. Some claimed it was obviously a hoax. Others said it warranted serious investigation. A few suggested it might be the most significant cryptozoological discovery in history. At the bottom of the article was my name, my ranch's location, and a note that the property owner had declined to comment. I scrolled through my messages, dozens of them from reporters, researchers, curiosity seekers. But one message made my blood run cold. It was from someone claiming to be organizing an expedition to the ranch, planning to arrive that afternoon with a group of serious researchers who had every right to investigate a potential scientific discovery. They were coming. Today. I looked up at Slate, who was watching me. "They're coming this afternoon. You have maybe 3 hours, maybe less." The community moved faster, their movements becoming frantic. But there was so much to gather, so much to carry, and some of the elders were moving slowly, struggling with the pace. "You're not going to make it," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "Not all of you. Not in 3 hours." Slate made a sound of frustration, then turned to me and made a series of gestures. "Help us. Slow them down. Give us time." "How? I can't stop them from coming onto my property. Not if they're determined. Not if there are enough of them." Slate gestured urgently. "Try. Please." I looked at the community, at the children being hurried along by their parents, at the elders struggling to keep up, at the young adults trying to carry supplies, and help the vulnerable at the same time. 45 years of protection. And it was ending like this, in chaos and fear and desperate flight. Okay, I said. Okay, I'll try. I'll do everything I can to buy you time. But Slate, after today, I don't know if I'll ever see you again. Slate approached me one last time. It placed both of its massive hands on my shoulders and looked directly into my eyes. Then it made a sound, low and resonant, that I'd heard it use only with its own family members. A sound of love, of gratitude, of goodbye. It reached into the fur on its side and pulled out something small, pressed it into my hand. I looked down and saw a carved stone, more intricate than any I'd seen before. It showed two figures, human and Bigfoot, standing side by side, but around them were carved symbols, a history, a story of 45 years of friendship. I'll keep it always, I whispered. I'll never forget you, never forget any of you. Slate touched my chest one last time, then turned and began leading the community toward the far end of the canyon, toward the narrow passages that led deeper into the wilderness. I watched them go, watched them disappear into the trees and rocks, watched 45 years of my life walk away. When the last of them had vanished, I turned and ran back toward the canyon entrance. I had work to do. I had to slow down the people who were coming, had to give Slate and the community every possible minute to get away. I emerged from the canyon and found my truck right where I'd left it. But there was another vehicle there now, a Jeep with Montana plates, and two men standing near the trailhead looking at a GPS device. "This is private property," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to leave." The men turned. They were in their 30s, dressed in hiking gear, carrying expensive cameras. "Mr. Thornhill," one of them asked, "we're researchers from the Montana Cryptozoology Society. We're here to investigate the structures that were discovered on your property." "There are no structures," I said, "just old mining debris. And you're trespassing. Leave now or I'm calling the sheriff." "We have a right to investigate potential scientific discoveries," the other man said. "If there really is evidence of an unknown species on your property, that supersedes your property rights." "That's not how the law works," I said, pulling out my phone. "You're trespassing, and I'm calling the authorities right now." "Go ahead," the first man said. "We'll wait for them to arrive. In the meantime, we're going to document what we can from here." He raised his camera and started taking photographs of the trailhead, of the terrain, of the direction the canyon lay. I realized with sinking dread that calling the sheriff would only bring more attention, more people, more chaos. Before I could decide what to do, I heard more vehicles approaching. 3 trucks pulled up, then 2 more cars. Within minutes, there were 15 people at the trailhead, all of them excited, all of them wanting to investigate the mysterious structures. "Mr. Thornhill, I'm Dave Patterson from KRTV News," a man with a camera crew said, approaching me. "Can we get a statement about the structures discovered on your property?" "There's nothing to discover," I said, but my voice sounded weak, even to my own ears. "This is all a misunderstanding." "Then why not let us take a look?" someone called out. "If there's nothing there, you've got nothing to hide." More vehicles were arriving. The crowd was growing. 20 people, then 30, then more. Some had cameras, some had recording equipment, some just had cell phones, ready to document whatever they found. I stood at the trailhead, one old man trying to hold back a tide of curiosity and greed and fascination. And I knew I couldn't do it, couldn't stop them all. couldn't give Slate enough time. "Please," I said, and I hated how desperate I sounded. "Please, just give me one day. Come back tomorrow, and I'll give you a full tour, answer all your questions. Just give me today to prepare, to make sure the area is safe." "Why?" someone shouted. "What are you hiding? What's up there that you don't want us to see? Is it really Bigfoot? Are you protecting them?" The crowd was getting agitated, pressing forward. I saw some people starting to move around me, heading for the trail. I couldn't stop them all, couldn't physically block dozens of determined people. And then I made a decision. The decision that would change everything. The decision I'd sworn I'd never make. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I thought might understand. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw had been the county sheriff for 15 years. He was a good man, fair, someone who respected the land and the people who lived on it. "Tom, it's Garrett Thornhill. I need your help. I've got about 40 trespassers on my property and more arriving every minute. They're trying to access a dangerous section of my land, and I can't control them." "I saw the news," Tom said. "The Bigfoot structures. That's what this is about." "Tom, I need you to come out here and clear these people off my property, and then I need to talk to you privately about something I should have told you years ago." There was a long pause. "Garrett, what's going on?" "Just come, please. And Tom, bring as many deputies as you can. This is going to get complicated." I hung up and turned back to the crowd. "The sheriff is on his way. Anyone who's still on my property when he arrives will be arrested for trespassing. I suggest you leave now." Some people started backing toward their vehicles, but others, the true believers, the ones who'd driven hours to get here, stood their ground. "We're not leaving until we see what's up there," one man said. He was in his 50s, wearing a shirt that said Bigfoot Research Team. "This is the discovery of the century, and you can't keep it hidden anymore." "There's nothing hidden," I said, but even as I spoke, I knew it was over. The lie I'd maintained for 45 years was crumbling. The secret was out, and there was no putting it back. More vehicles arrived. I saw news vans from multiple stations. I saw people with professional camera equipment. I saw what looked like a documentary crew setting up. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later with 4 deputies. Tom Bradshaw was in his 50s, tall and solid, with the kind of presence that made people listen. He took one look at the crowd and shook his head. "All right, everyone, this is private property. Mr. Thornhill has asked you to leave, which means you're trespassing. I'm giving you 5 minutes to get back to your vehicles and clear out. Anyone still here after that will be arrested." "Sheriff, we have a right to investigate," the man in the Bigfoot Research Team shirt protested. "If there's evidence of an unknown species—" "You have no such right," Tom interrupted. "This is private property, and the law is clear. Now move." The crowd began to disperse, reluctantly, angrily. People were shouting questions at me, at the sheriff, at anyone who would listen. Cameras were recording everything. I knew this footage would be all over the internet within hours. When the last vehicle had finally left, Tom turned to me. "Garrett, what the hell's going on? And don't tell me there's nothing up there. I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you this rattled." I looked at the 4 deputies standing nearby. "Can we talk privately?" Tom studied my face, then nodded. He told his deputies to secure the trailhead, make sure no one came back, then followed me to my truck. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, "Tom, What I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but I need you to listen to the whole thing before you decide I've lost my mind. I'm listening. I took a deep breath. There are Bigfoot living on my property. Have been since before I inherited the ranch. I've been protecting them for 45 years. And because of those satellite images, because of the internet, their location has been exposed. They're fleeing right now, trying to get deeper into the wilderness before more people show up. Tom stared at me. Garrett, I have proof, I interrupted. Photographs, journals, artifacts. 45 years of documentation. They're real, Tom. They're intelligent. They have culture and language and families. And if the world finds them, they'll be hunted down, captured, killed. I need your help to protect them. Garrett, do you hear what you're saying? Bigfoot? You're telling me Bigfoot is real, and you've been hiding them for 45 years. Yes, and I know how it sounds. But I can prove it. Come back to my ranch house. Let me show you the evidence. And then you can decide if I'm crazy or if I'm telling the truth. Tom was quiet for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he said, Show me. We drove back to the ranch in separate vehicles, Tom following me. The whole way, I was second-guessing my decision. Was I making things worse? Was I betraying Slate's trust by telling someone, even someone I thought I could trust? But I didn't have a choice anymore. The secret was out. The only question now was whether I could control how the truth was revealed, whether I could protect them, even as their existence became public knowledge. At the ranch house, I led Tom down to the basement, to the fireproof safe, where I'd kept everything locked away for decades. My hand shook as I worked the combination. Inside were 12 journals, hundreds of photographs, artifacts that Slate had given me over the years, and the Hunter's Journal from 1873. Evidence of a lifetime of guardianship. Proof of a people that weren't supposed to exist. I handed Tom the first journal, the one I'd started in 1978. Start with this. Read the first few entries. Then look at the photographs. Tom opened the journal and began reading. I watched his face as he processed what he was seeing. Skepticism at first, then confusion, then something that might have been wonder. He looked at the photographs, close-ups of the structures, of carved artifacts, of footprints in the mud. And then he came to the photographs I'd taken of Slate, the ones I'd kept locked away, never shown to anyone. Clear, undeniable photographs of a Bigfoot. Standing in the canyon, sitting by the creek, interacting with other members of the community. Photographs that couldn't be faked, not with the level of detail they showed, not with the consistency across decades of documentation. Tom set down the journal and looked at me. My God, Garrett, this is real. This is actually real. Yes, I said simply. And now the world knows where they are. They're running, Tom. Right now they're fleeing deeper into the wilderness. But it's not safe out there anymore. There's nowhere left to hide. They need protection, real protection, legal protection. How? Tom asked. How do we protect something that officially doesn't exist? There are no laws covering this, no precedents, no framework. Then we create one, I said. We go public. We show the evidence. We tell the truth. And we demand that they be protected as an endangered species, as a people with rights, as beings that deserve to exist without being hunted or captured or studied like animals. Tom ran his hand through his hair, overwhelmed. Garrett, do you understand what you're suggesting? This will be the biggest story in the world. Every news outlet, every government agency, every scientist and hunter and curiosity seeker will descend on Montana. Your life will never be the same." "My life stopped being normal 45 years ago," I said. "I've sacrificed everything to keep them safe. Marriage, family, friends, a normal life. All of it gone because I made a promise to my grandfather and to Slate. And now that promise requires me to do the one thing I swore I'd never do: tell the truth." Tom was quiet for a long time, looking at the evidence spread out before him. Then he said, "If we do this, we do it right. We control the narrative. We present the evidence carefully, professionally. We get ahead of the story before it gets away from us." "How?" "We call a press conference tomorrow morning. We invite every major news outlet, every scientific organization that matters, and we present everything: the journals, the photographs, the artifacts. We tell your story, and we make it clear that these beings need protection, not exploitation. And if people don't believe us, if they think it's an elaborate hoax," Tom gestured at the evidence, "with this, with 45 years of documentation, they'll believe us, Garrett. The question isn't whether they'll believe, it's what they'll do once they know the truth." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room, looking at the carved stone Slate had given me, thinking about 45 years of friendship, of trust, of shared secrets, thinking about the community fleeing through the wilderness, terrified, displaced, running from a world that had finally discovered them. I thought about calling it off, about refusing to go public, about trying to maintain the lie just a little longer, but I knew it was too late. The satellite images existed. The internet had spread them everywhere. People would keep coming, keep searching, keep investigating. The only way to protect Slate and the community now was to tell the truth, to make their existence undeniable, to demand that they be treated with the dignity and respect they deserved. At dawn, I drove back up to the canyon one last time. The structures were gone, dismantled, and scattered. The community had erased as much evidence as they could in the time they had. But I knew where to look, knew the signs that others would miss. I found a single carved stone, left on the flat rock where I'd left so many offerings over the years. It showed two figures walking away from each other, but connected by a line that stretched between them. Separation, but not abandonment. Distance, but not the end. Slate's final message to me: goodbye, but not forever. We're still connected, still brothers, even if we can never meet again. I picked up the stone and held it tight. "I'm going to protect you," I said to the empty canyon. "I'm going to tell your story, and I'm going to make sure the world knows you deserve to exist. I promise." The press conference was scheduled for 10 o'clock that morning. By 9:30, the ranch was surrounded by news vans, reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Sheriff Bradshaw had brought in additional deputies to maintain order, to keep people from trying to access the canyon while we made our announcement. I stood in front of my ranch house, looking at the crowd of reporters and cameras, and felt the weight of 45 years pressing down on me. This was it. The moment everything changed. The moment the secret became truth. Tom stood beside me, lending his authority as sheriff to what I was about to say. He'd reviewed all the evidence, verified what he could, and made the decision to support me publicly. It was a risk for him, professionally and personally, but he believed it was the right thing to do. At exactly 10 o'clock, I stepped up to the microphone that had been set up on my porch. "My name is Garrett Thornhill," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. And for 45 years, I've been keeping a secret that I believe the world needs to know. On my property, in a remote canyon in the Montana wilderness, there has been a community of beings that science claims don't exist. Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Whatever name you want to use, they're real. They've been living on my land since before I inherited it, and I've been protecting them, keeping them hidden, because I made a promise to my grandfather and to them that I would keep them safe from a world that would hunt them, capture them, or kill them. The crowd erupted with questions, with shouts, with disbelief. I raised my hand for silence. I have proof, I continued. 45 years of documentation, photographs, journals, artifacts, evidence that cannot be dismissed or explained away. I'm going to share all of it with you today. But first, I need to make something absolutely clear. These beings are not animals. They're not monsters. They're people. Different from us, yes, but people nonetheless. They have language, culture, families, history. They feel joy and grief and fear. They deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And they deserve legal protection as an endangered species, as a people with rights. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces, at the cameras recording every word. Yesterday, because of satellite imagery that revealed their settlement, they were forced to flee, to abandon the home they've had for generations, to scatter into a wilderness that's shrinking every year, that offers less and less protection. They're running right now, terrified, because humanity has discovered them. And what I'm asking, what I'm demanding, is that we do better, that we prove we're capable of coexisting with beings different from ourselves, that we protect them instead of hunting them, that we give them the right to exist in peace. I gestured to Tom. Sheriff Bradshaw has reviewed my evidence and can verify its authenticity. We're prepared to share everything with qualified scientists, with government agencies, with anyone who approaches this with respect and genuine interest in protecting these beings. But I'm also making it clear that I will fight, with every resource I have, against anyone who tries to exploit them, hunt them, or treat them as anything less than the intelligent, feeling people they are. The questions came fast and furious after that. Where exactly was the settlement? How many individuals were there? Could I prove the photographs weren't faked? Had I actually communicated with them? Why had I kept this secret for so long? I answered what I could, showed the evidence, told the story of 45 years of guardianship. Tom backed me up, adding his authority as a law enforcement officer to the credibility of my claims. The press conference lasted 3 hours. By the time it ended, the story was everywhere. Every news outlet in the country was covering it. Social media was exploding. Scientists were demanding access to the evidence. Government agencies were issuing statements. Cryptozoologists were celebrating. Skeptics were claiming it was an elaborate hoax. And somewhere in the deep wilderness of Montana, Slate and the community were hiding, listening perhaps to the distant sounds of helicopters and vehicles, knowing that their world had changed forever. I'd kept my promise to tell their story. Now, I had to keep my promise to protect them, even as the whole world came looking. The 48 hours following the press conference were the most chaotic of my life. My ranch became ground zero for what the media was calling the most significant zoological discovery in human history. News helicopters circled overhead constantly. Reporters camped at my gate. My phone rang so incessantly that I finally just turned it off. But it was the other calls, the ones that came through Sheriff Bradshaw, that worried me most. Federal agencies, the FBI, the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, everyone wanted access to my evidence, to my property, to the canyon where the community had lived. They're talking about declaring the area a federal research site, Tom told me on Thursday morning, 2 days after the press conference. Taking jurisdiction away from the county, maybe even seizing your property under eminent domain for scientific purposes. They can't do that, I said, but even as I spoke, I knew they could. If they wanted to badly enough, they'd find a way. We need a lawyer, Garrett, a good one, someone who specializes in property rights and environmental law. And we need to move fast before the federal government makes any official moves. I'd already been contacted by dozens of lawyers, all of them offering their services. But there was one who stood out. Rebecca Winters, an environmental attorney from Seattle who'd made a name for herself protecting indigenous rights and endangered species. She'd called me personally, not through an assistant, and her first question hadn't been about money or publicity. Mr. Thornhill, do you believe these beings have rights, not as animals, but as people? Yes, I'd said without hesitation. Absolutely. Then I want to help you, not to study them or exploit them, but to establish legal protections that recognize their personhood, their right to exist unmolested. It's going to be the fight of our lives, but if we can pull it off, we'll change everything. Rebecca arrived at the ranch on Thursday afternoon, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an intensity that reminded me of Slate. She spent 6 hours reviewing my evidence, asking detailed questions, taking notes. "This is extraordinary," she said finally, sitting back in my living room with a journal in her lap. 45 years of consistent documentation. Photographs that show clear evidence of tool use, social structure, cultural practices, artifacts that demonstrate artistic expression and symbolic thinking. Garrett, what you've documented here isn't just proof that Bigfoot exists. It's proof that they're a people, a culture, and that changes everything legally. How? I asked. Because if we can establish that they're not just an unknown species of ape, but a people with culture and intelligence comparable to humans, then they deserve protections beyond what the Endangered Species Act provides. We're talking about rights, the right to self-determination, the right to their ancestral lands, the right to exist without being hunted, captured, or studied against their will. Can we actually do that? Legally? Rebecca smiled, but it was a fierce smile. We're going to try. I'm filing an emergency petition tomorrow morning with the federal court, seeking a temporary restraining order against any government seizure of your property or attempts to capture or study these beings without their consent. We're going to argue that they constitute an indigenous people with inherent rights under both U.S. and international law. The government's going to fight this, Tom said. He'd been sitting quietly, listening. They're going to argue that we don't even know if these beings are still on Garrett's property, that they might not exist at all outside of his documentation. Which is why we need more than just Garrett's evidence, Rebecca said. She turned to me. You said they fled into the Bob Marshall wilderness. Do you have any idea where they might have gone? Any way to contact them? I thought about the carved stone slate had left me, about the message of separation, but continued connection. I might. But I won't lead anyone to them. I won't betray their location. I'm not asking you to, Rebecca said. But if there was a way to communicate with them, to ask if they'd be willing to be seen, to demonstrate their existence and their intelligence on their own terms, it would strengthen our case immeasurably. I looked at the carved stone sitting on my desk. Could I find them? Could I reach out to Slate one more time? And if I did, would they trust me after everything that had happened? I can try, I said finally, but I can't promise anything. They're terrified right now. They've been forced from their home. They might not want anything to do with humans, even me. Try, Rebecca said, because right now the narrative is being controlled by people who want to treat them as animals, as specimens to be studied. We need to change that narrative. We need to show the world that they're people who deserve respect and autonomy. That night, I sat alone in my living room, holding the carved stone Slate had left me, trying to figure out how to find them. The Bob Marshall Wilderness covered over 1 million acres of some of the most remote terrain in the lower 48 states. They could be anywhere, but I knew Slate, knew how it thought, how it made decisions. It would go somewhere familiar, somewhere the community had been before, somewhere with water, shelter, and enough isolation to feel safe. I pulled out my old maps, the ones Grandfather had marked up over the years. He'd documented places where he'd seen signs of Bigfoot activity, areas where they seemed to travel or gather. Most of those places were now too developed, too accessible. But there was one location, deep in the wilderness, that Grandfather had marked with a special symbol, a place he'd called the Old Gathering Ground. I'd never been there. It was too remote, too difficult to reach. But if Slate was looking for a place to hide, a place with historical significance to its people, that's where it would go. The next morning, I told Rebecca and Tom my plan. I'm going into the Bob Marshall. There's a place I think they might have gone. If I can find them, if I can talk to Slate, maybe I can convince them to help us, to show themselves on their own terms. Garrett, you're 73 years old, Tom said. That's rough country. It could take days to reach this location, and you'd be going alone. I've been hiking these mountains for 50 years, I said. I can handle it. Let me come with you, Tom offered. At least then you'd have backup if something goes wrong. I shook my head. They won't show themselves if there's someone they don't know. It has to be just me. They have to trust that I'm not leading others to them. Rebecca looked worried but nodded. How long do you think you'll need? 3 days, maybe 4. If I'm not back in a week, assume something went wrong. And if you find them, if they agree to help, then I'll bring back proof, real proof, not just photographs, but a living demonstration of their intelligence, their personhood, something that can't be denied or dismissed. I spent the rest of that day preparing. I packed supplies for a week-long trek, including food that Slate had always liked, offerings that might help convince them I came in peace. I left detailed instructions with Rebecca about my evidence, about what to do if I didn't return, and I wrote a letter to be opened only if I died out there. A letter explaining everything, thanking Slate for 45 years of friendship, asking forgiveness for the exposure that had driven them from their home. I left before dawn on Saturday morning, hiking into the wilderness while the ranch was still surrounded by media and curiosity seekers. Tom had arranged for deputies to keep everyone away from the trailhead I was using, to give me a head start before anyone realized I was gone. The hike was brutal. My 73-year-old body protested every step, every climb, every mile. My knees ached, my back screamed, my lungs burned in the thin mountain air. But I pushed on, driven by the knowledge that this might be my last chance to help them, to fulfill the promise I'd made 45 years ago. I hiked for 2 days, following grandfather's old maps, navigating by landmarks that had probably been there for centuries. I saw no signs of human presence, no trails, no camps, no evidence that anyone had been in this area for years. It was as remote as I'd hoped. On the third day, as I was making my way through a narrow valley with a creek running through it, I found the first sign. A carved symbol on a tree trunk, subtle enough that most people would miss it, but unmistakable to me. It was one of the symbols Slate's people used, a marker indicating safe passage. I followed the symbols, finding them every few hundred yards, leading me deeper into the valley. And then, as the sun was beginning to set, I heard it. That low, resonant vocalization I'd heard 1,000 times over 45 years. Slate's call. I stopped walking and called back, using the simple vocalization I'd learned decades ago, the one that meant friend or family. Silence. Then movement in the trees ahead. A massive figure emerged from the shadows, and even from a distance I recognized the gray-streaked fur, the distinctive gait. Slate. We stood there, maybe 50 yards apart, looking at each other. I could see the wariness in its posture, the uncertainty. I'd brought chaos to their lives. I'd exposed them to the world. Why should it trust me now? I slowly lowered myself to a sitting position on the ground, the gesture of non-threat we'd established decades ago. Then I pulled out the carved stone Slate had left me and held it up so it could see. "I got your message," I called out. "I understand you had to leave, but Slate, I need your help. I need to ask you something, and I'll understand if the answer is no." Slate moved closer, stopping about 20 feet away. It made a questioning sound. "The world knows you exist now," I said. "There's no putting that secret back. But right now, people are arguing about what you are. Some say you're just animals, that you should be captured and studied. Others say you're people, that you deserve rights and protection. I'm fighting for the second option, but I need your help to prove it." Slate tilted its head, listening. "I need you to show yourself, not to be captured or studied, but to demonstrate your intelligence, your personhood, to prove to the world that you're not animals, that you're a people who deserve respect and autonomy. I know it's asking a lot. I know you're terrified, but it might be the only way to protect your people in the long run." Slate was quiet for a long moment. Then it made a series of vocalizations and gestures. Questions. How? Where? Safe. "There's a lawyer, a good person who wants to help. She's fighting to get you legal protections, to establish that you have rights. But she needs proof that you're intelligent, that you're capable of communication and culture. If you could meet with her, show her what you've shown me over the years, it would change everything." Slate made a sound of distress. "Too dangerous. Too many humans." "I know. But Slate, think about it. Right now, you're running, you're hiding, and the world is getting smaller every year. There are fewer places to hide, more satellites watching, more people exploring. Eventually, you'll be found again. And when that happens, if there are no legal protections in place, your people will be captured, studied, maybe killed. This might be your only chance to establish rights before it's too late." Slate turned away, and I thought I'd lost it. Thought it was going to disappear back into the wilderness, and I'd never see it again. But then it made a different sound, a calling sound, and other figures emerged from the trees, the community, or what remained of it. I counted 19 individuals down from the 31 I'd seen in the canyon. My heart sank. Had they lost some during the flight? Had families been separated? Slate made a series of vocalizations to the group, and I watched as they communicated, debated, made a decision together. This wasn't just Slate's choice. It was a community decision, a democratic process. Finally, Slate turned back to me and made a gesture. Agreement, but conditions. What conditions? I asked. Slate made a series of gestures and vocalizations. I understood most of it. They would show themselves, but only to a few people, only in a place of their choosing, only with guarantees of safety, and only if I was there, acting as them, valleys filled not with life, but with churning, silt-laden water. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of moisture from the eaves and the distant cry of the wind. It was a world in limbo, caught between the cataclysm and the new creation, and the family within the ark felt the tension of that in-between space in their very bones. Noah, his face etched with the lines of 100 years of obedience, felt a new restlessness stirring. The divine command to build was complete, the preservation was assured, but now a human curiosity, a need for a sign, began to gnaw at him. He needed to know if the earth could once again sustain life, if the mud below held a promise of roots and renewal. His gaze fell upon the ravens, a pair of glossy black birds with intelligent, piercing eyes, housed in a cage near the window. They were creatures of the wild, scavengers who could range far and wide, who knew the secrets of land and air. A plan, simple and born of this newfound urgency, formed in his mind. He would send out a scout, a winged emissary, to probe the silence of the drowned world. With gentle, deliberate hands, he opened the cage and selected the male raven, its feathers a sheen of captured darkness. The bird hopped onto his wrist, its weight familiar and trusting. Noah carried it to the small, high window, unsealing the protective membrane that had kept the storm at bay for so long. A rush of cool, damp air flooded in, carrying the scent of whetstone and vast open spaces. For a moment, the raven perched on the sill, its head cocked, its jet-black eyes scanning the incomprehensible vista of water and rock. Then, with a powerful thrust of its wings, it launched itself into the void. The family watched, their breath held, as the black shape dwindled against the immense gray canvas of the sky, a single dark question mark written against the silence. They waited. Hours bled into a day, and then another. Their routines continued, the feeding, the cleaning, the prayers. But now every sound from outside was scrutinized, every shadow at the window a cause for a frisson of hope. And then, on the evening of the second day, a familiar shape appeared, circling the ark before alighting clumsily on the ridgepole, its feathers ruffled and damp. The raven had returned, but it brought no sign, carried no sprig of green in its beak. It simply perched there, a dark sentinel, before taking wing again, disappearing into the mist. This pattern repeated itself over the following days. The raven would fly out, a symbol of their yearning, only to return each time, its flights becoming a restless, purposeless rhythm between the ark and the featureless waters. It found no place to perch, no dry land on which to rest its feet, only the endless heaving waves and the slick, waterlogged carcasses of drowned trees. It was a creature of the air and the ark, trapped between the two, its endless comings and goings, a mirror of their own suspended existence. "Mr. Thornhill," she said as we hiked, "I want you to know that I approach this with complete respect for these beings, whatever they turn out to be. If they're as intelligent as you claim, if they truly have culture and language, then they deserve to be treated as people, not research subjects." "Thank you," I said. "That means everything." We reached the clearing around mid-morning. I'd brought offerings, food, and carved stones that Slate had always appreciated. I arranged them in the center of the clearing, then we backed away to the edge, making ourselves as non-threatening as possible. And we waited. An hour passed, then 2. Dr. Okonkwo remained patient, sitting quietly, observing the forest. Rebecca took notes. Tom kept watch, making sure no one had followed us. Then, just after noon, I heard it. The low, resonant call I'd been waiting for. I called back, using the vocalization that meant safe and friend, movement in the trees. And then Slate emerged, followed by 3 others. Not the whole community, just a small delegation. Slate, an elder female I recognized, a young adult male, and one of the juveniles, now nearly full grown. Dr. Okonkwo gasped softly but remained still. Rebecca's hand shook as she took notes. Tom's eyes were wide with wonder. Slate approached slowly, stopping about 30 feet from us. It looked at me, and I nodded. "It's okay. These are the people I told you about. They're here to help." Slate made a sound, then gestured to the others in its group. They moved forward together, and I began the most important introduction of my life. "Slate, this is Rebecca. She's a lawyer who wants to help protect your people. This is Tom. You remember him? He's the sheriff. And this is Dr. Sarah. She's a scientist, but a good one. She studies how intelligent beings communicate and live together." I turned to the humans. "This is Slate. We've been friends for 45 years. Slate is the leader of this community, or at least one of the leaders. These are members of Slate's family and community." For the next 4 hours we witnessed something extraordinary. Slate and the others demonstrated their intelligence in ways that left no room for doubt. They showed us their artifacts, carved stones, and woven fibers that demonstrated artistic expression and symbolic thinking. They communicated with each other using a complex system of vocalizations and gestures that clearly constituted language. They solved problems we presented, demonstrating reasoning and planning abilities. But most remarkably, they engaged with us. Slate used the communication system we developed over decades to answer questions, to explain aspects of their culture, to tell their history. Using a combination of gestures, vocalizations, and drawings in the dirt, Slate told the story of its people, how they'd once lived openly, interacting with early humans, how they'd been driven into hiding by hunting and persecution, how their population had dwindled from thousands to hundreds, how they'd survived by staying hidden, by avoiding human contact, by passing down knowledge of how to remain invisible. Dr. Okonkwo was in tears by the end. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice shaking. "They're not just intelligent. They're people. They have history, culture, language. They're a civilization that's been hiding in plain sight for centuries." Rebecca was documenting everything, taking photographs and videos with Slate's permission, recording evidence that would form the basis of our legal case. "Slate," Rebecca said, speaking slowly and clearly, "I want to help your people. I want to establish legal protections that recognize your right to exist, your right to your lands, your right to live without being hunted or captured. but I need to know what you want. What would safety look like for your people?" Slate thought for a long moment, then began to communicate. Through gestures and drawings, it explained what the community needed. Protected lands where they could live without human interference. Legal recognition as a people, not as animals. The right to remain hidden, to choose when and if they interacted with humans. Protection from hunting, from capture, from forced study. "We can do that," Rebecca said. "We can fight for all of that, but I need you to understand it's going to take time. The legal system moves slowly, and there will be people who fight against these protections, who want to study you or hunt you or prove you don't deserve rights. Are you willing to be patient, to trust that we're working for you even when it seems like nothing is happening?" Slate looked at me, and I nodded. "I trust Rebecca. I trust Dr. Sarah. They're good people. They'll fight for you." Slate made a sound of agreement, then did something that made everyone in the clearing catch their breath. It approached Rebecca directly, stopping just a few feet from her, and extended one massive hand. Rebecca, to her credit, didn't hesitate. She reached out and took Slate's hand, and they stood there for a moment, human and Bigfoot, connected by touch and trust. "I promise," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face, "I promise I'll fight for you with everything I have." Slate made a soft sound, then released her hand and stepped back. It turned to me and made a series of gestures. "Goodbye, for now. Trust you? Thank you. I'll keep fighting," I promised. "I'll never stop protecting you." Slate touched my shoulder one last time, then turned and led its group back into the forest. We watched them disappear into the trees, and I felt the weight of 45 years lifting slightly. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had allies. I had people who understood what was at stake. The legal battle that followed was long and complex. Rebecca filed her petition, supported by Dr. Okonkwo's expert testimony and the evidence from our meeting. The federal government fought back, arguing that Bigfoot couldn't be granted rights because they weren't human, that they should be classified as an endangered species and studied accordingly. But we had something the government didn't expect. We had public opinion on our side. The footage from our meeting, released carefully and strategically, went viral. The world watched as Slate demonstrated intelligence, communication, culture. They saw the moment Slate and Rebecca shook hands, saw the clear evidence of personhood. Scientists around the world weighed in. Anthropologists, primatologists, ethicists, all arguing that beings with this level of intelligence and culture deserved rights beyond what the Endangered Species Act provided. Indigenous rights organizations joined our cause, drawing parallels between the treatment of Bigfoot and the historical treatment of indigenous peoples. Environmental groups advocated for protected lands. Even some religious organizations got involved, arguing that all intelligent beings deserve dignity and respect. The case made its way through the courts over the next 18 months. District Court, Appeals Court, eventually reaching the Supreme Court. And in October of 2024, the Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling. Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, or whatever name one chose to use, were to be recognized as a protected people under U.S. law. They were granted rights to ancestral lands, protection from hunting and capture, and the right to self-determination. Large sections of wilderness in Montana, Washington, Oregon, and Northern California were designated as protected territories where human access was restricted. It wasn't perfect, There were still people who wanted to hunt them, to study them, to prove they didn't deserve rights. But for the first time in centuries, Slate's people had legal protection. They had the right to exist. I was 74 years old when the ruling came down. I'd spent 46 years protecting them, and finally, that protection had teeth. I hiked back into the wilderness one last time, to the valley where I'd found Slate after the exposure. I left a carved stone there, one I'd made myself, showing two figures standing side by side with the scales of justice between them. I didn't see Slate that day, didn't expect to. They were deep in the protected territories now, living their lives away from human eyes. But I knew the message would reach them somehow, knew they'd understand what it meant. We'd won, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to give them a chance, enough to let them live without constant fear. I'm 75 years old now as I tell you this story. It's been 2 years since the Supreme Court ruling, and the world has changed in ways I never imagined. There are ongoing debates about Bigfoot rights, about how to balance human needs with their need for protected lands. There are still sightings, still encounters, but now there are also consequences for those who threaten them. Rebecca continues to fight for them, working on international protections, trying to extend the legal framework to Canada and other countries where Bigfoot populations might exist. Dr. Okonkwo has dedicated her career to studying them, but only through non-invasive means, only with their consent. And me? I still live on the ranch. The canyon where Slate's community lived for so long is part of the protected territory now. I hike up there sometimes, sit at the entrance, remember 46 years of friendship and guardianship. I haven't seen Slate since that day in the clearing when we shook hands with Rebecca and made our promise. I don't know if I ever will again. They're living their lives now, free from the constant threat of discovery, free to exist on their own terms. But sometimes, when I'm sitting at the canyon entrance in the evening, I hear that low resonant call echoing off the canyon walls. And I call back, using the vocalization that means friend and family. And I like to think that somewhere in the deep wilderness, Slate hears me and knows that the promise was kept, that 46 years of sacrifice and secrecy and love weren't in vain, that their people have a future now, a chance to survive and thrive and pass their culture down to new generations. The carved stone Slate gave me, the one showing two figures connected by a line, sits on my desk. Next to it is the stone I left in the valley, the one with the scales of justice. Two bookends to a story that spanned nearly half a century. People ask me if I regret it. 46 years of my life dedicated to keeping a secret, to protecting beings that most people didn't believe existed. 46 years without a wife, without children, without the normal life I might have had. I tell them the truth. I regret nothing, because I was privileged to witness something extraordinary. I was trusted by beings who had every reason to fear humans, who had been hunted and persecuted for centuries. I was allowed into their world, allowed to see their culture and their history and their humanity, and in the end, I was able to help them, to give them legal protection, to establish their rights, to ensure that they could exist without constant fear. That's worth more than any normal life could have given me. I'm 75 years old, and I don't know how many years I have left, but I know that when I die, I'll die knowing I kept my promise. To my grandfather, who made me swear to protect them, to Slate, who trusted me with the biggest secret in the world, to the community who allowed me to be part of their story. The world knows now that Bigfoot is real, that they're not monsters or myths, but people, a people who deserve respect, dignity, and the right to exist. And somewhere in the protected wilderness of Montana, a community of 27 individuals, the survivors who fled the canyon that terrible day in March of 2023, are living their lives, raising their children, passing down their culture, surviving, because one old rancher kept a secret for 46 years and then broke that secret in exactly the right way at exactly the right time. I still leave food at the canyon entrance sometimes. Apples, dried meat, the things Slade always liked. It's always gone by morning. Maybe it's bears, maybe it's other animals, or maybe, just maybe, it's a friend I haven't seen in 2 years, stopping by to say thank you, to say the bond we formed over 46 years hasn't been broken by distance or time or the chaos that exposure brought. Brothers, Slate called us. Across species, across worlds, across every barrier that should have kept us apart. Brothers. And that's what we'll always be, no matter what comes next. If you take anything from this story, take this. The world is bigger and stranger and more wonderful than we imagine. There are mysteries still hiding in the wild places, beings we don't understand, connections we haven't made, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is protect those mysteries, not to exploit them or expose them or profit from them, but to let them exist, to give them space, to recognize that not everything needs to be known, studied, or controlled. Some things are sacred. Some secrets are kept not out of shame, but out of love. And some friendships transcend everything we think we know about what's possible. I'm Garrett Thornhill. I'm 75 years old, and for 46 years, I protected the biggest secret in the world. Now that secret is out, but the protection continues. The promise remains. And somewhere in the Montana wilderness, a people who aren't supposed to exist are living proof that humanity is capable of something better than what we've shown for most of our history. We're capable of coexistence, of respect, of recognizing that we share this world with others who deserve the same rights we claim for ourselves. That's the real story. Not that Bigfoot is real, but that we chose to protect them instead of destroying them. And that choice, that one moment of doing the right thing instead of the easy thing, might just save them. It's a start. It's not perfect, but it's a start. And sometimes that's all we can ask for.